Hello, I'm Lanisha DeBartoleben, President and CEO of the Northwest African American Museum. On behalf of the museum, I welcome you to our Descendants Series, an evening with the great-great-great-grandson of Nat Turner. We acknowledge that we are on the homelands of the Spokane tribal people. We recognize the indigenous peoples who have been dispossessed and displaced from their ancestral and spiritual homes and the taking of their land through colonization. We honor with gratitude the land itself, the waterways, the indigenous people, and their ancient heritage. We are grateful for and honor our African and African American ancestors who survived the Ma'afa, the Middle Passage, who endured the violence of slavery and the indignity of racial oppression, who had the courage to pack up and head north and west to the Northwest, who blazed trails for us to be here and to be ourselves here. We acknowledge and we take action. As we begin this program honoring the sacred life, legacy, and lineage of Nat Turner, we call out the names of the ancestors who shared the same spirit of liberty as Nat Turner. Those like Harriet Tubman, Dred Scott, William Grimes, Solomon Northup, Henry Box Brown, William Wells Brown, William and Ellen Craft, Frederick Douglass, Henry Bibb, and all those unnamed ancestors who stood up against the inhumane system of slavery. We remember them. We honor them. We are because of them. Nat Turner was a hero, a freedom fighter. He stood up to the violent system of slavery for his humanity and for ours, and said through his actions, by any means necessary, he would be free. We are here to learn his story, to pay tribute to his courageous sacrifice, and to honor his legacy with his direct descendant, Mr. Bruce Turner, who is with us here today. This program is about reckoning with this shared past. It is about remembering. It's about never forgetting the pain, the difficult decisions, the trauma they endured. We owe our ancestors our attention. Most of all, this program and history itself is about our healing. It is about the decisions we are making today to become free and to free others. It is about finding our way forward, rising above every obstacle faced in life. On this exact day, 191 years ago, November 11, 1831, Nat Turner gave up his life for the cause of freedom and liberation. Today, be inspired by his steadfast commitment to humanity, his resistance to oppression, and his faith. Today's conversation will be moderated by Kiantha Duncan, president of the Spokane branch NAACP. She is a tireless champion for community, for crucial conversations, and for change. Thank you all for joining us to learn about Nat Turner, the one who never stopped believing in and pursuing freedom. Ms. Duncan?
Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon to those of you who are here and those of you who are in the audience at home watching us as well. Tonight is a very special night. When I say special, I mean very special. I have had the last 24 hours to get to know Mr. Turner, and I think that you all will find him very interesting. He has lots to share with us, lots of information. Mr. Bruce Turner was born in Southampton County, Virginia, and he currently resides in Virginia Beach, Virginia. His lineage to our great, great, great Nat Turner was one in which he can share with us something that we would never know, because he gets to share what he knows from his family's perspective as well. So we're looking forward tonight. Since the mid-1990s, Mr. Turner has researched the history of Nat Turner and the Southampton slave insurrection of 1881. He received information on the Nat Turner legend form from his grandparents, from his great-grandparents, from his aunts, and from his uncles. We would like to play for you a very short video featuring Mr. Turner.
Bruce L. Turner, the great-great-great-grandson of Nat Turner. Bruce Turner's story is a story of spirituality, hope, and the Black struggle for freedom and justice in America during slavery. His great-great-great-grandfather, Nat Turner, was a leader, preacher, and an enslaved man who would lead a rebellion of enslaved people against their oppressors in 1831. Nat Turner's rebellion of 1831 made a lasting impact in the decades to follow. Abolitionists following his rebellion exalted the virtues of Nat Turner as a crusader against the evils of slavery. Nat Turner influenced freedom fighters like Frederick Douglass and others. Turner's legacy will continue to be remembered and honored through his family that continues to share his story through oral history and documentation. His great-great-great-grandson, Bruce Turner, spent most of his childhood living in Southampton County, whereby he received an abundance of information on the Nat Turner legend from grandparents, great-grandparents, aunts, and uncles. Since the mid-1990s, Bruce has devoted serious research and investigation into the history of Nat Turner and the Southampton slave insurrection of 1831. Nat Turner continues to live on through the life and legacy of Bruce Turner as visionary, liberator, legend.
I want to thank you all here in Spokane for allowing me to come and talk with you today about Nat Turner. He was a man whose efforts to correct a terrible wrong did define a moment in history which we all study today. His period in time was when a man as a slave was not human. I want you to keep this in mind. He was a thing. He was just a piece of property. He was a chattel that could be bought and sold or whipped and killed at the will and whim of its legal owner. And only after years of study and following the Christian Bible did he try to change that status, and he relieved himself of being a slave as well as to free all other people of a slave. And in doing that, Nat passed on to the American public 3 little words which exist still today, and that was all here and now. Nat wanted all people, all slaves, to be free. He wanted them to be free right here in this country, not in some place sent somewhere else. And he wanted it now, right at that time in August 22, 1831. Today, we all live that motto of Nat Turner. And if you take this with you, remember, Nat's motto is all here and now.
Good evening.
All righty.
So
Good evening to you.
Thank you. I'm super excited to talk to you tonight. I have enjoyed getting to know you over the last few days and learn about not just your grandfather, great-great-grandfather, but about you as a man, because I think the work that you do really relates directly to your grandfather. So tell us a little bit about, when was the first time that you understood that you were the Nat Turner's great-great-great-grandson?
Well, in answer to your question with that, there really wasn't a time that I didn't know. As far back as my memory goes, it was always talked about in the family, but we were told, don't tell anybody else. Because living in Southampton County, Virginia, I was born back in 1948. In the 50s, the 48 and the 50s, segregation was still was heavily entrenched in Virginia. A lot of the descendants, the white descendants of families that were killed, lived right next door to us. We lived on a farm, and they lived on the farm next to ours. So the concept of accepting Nat Turner and openly talking about it was not encouraged. We used to go out to the places where the homes were attacked, and my grandparents, as well as my aunts and uncles, would have times that we would identify with what Nat Turner was, as well as who the people were that came after him. So in answer to your question, I don't ever have a memory of not knowing about Nat Turner.
Did that cause a sense of fear for your family still living in Virginia Beach? What was that like?
In Virginia Beach is 80 miles from where
Okay.
I grew up at in Southampton County in
Okay.
a little town called Capron. So Capron is where I learned about Nat, and I lived there until I was a teenager. Going to school, elementary school, as well as through high school, beginning in what we call middle school, the schools were segregated. So we only had a little bit of Nat Turner in the history. The county would not allow it to be taught in the history books.
Okay.
There was only a little marker on the side of the road that says this is where it happened at. And so it was among the black families in the black community to where the history of what Nat Turner was, what he did, was passed on.
How does your great-great-grandfather's work show up in your work today? And I know that you're retired now, but you do a lot of really amazing things. And so tell me how those two connect.
Okay, well, in the early part of my growing up, I learned that to free your mind was the number one thing. I always used to admire how Nat had taught himself how to read and write, that he refused to let himself be held down just because he was a slave. Also, too, growing up on a farm, there was a lot of work to do. And one of the ways to get out of work was reading. So I always made sure I had a book in my hand every day.
To keep you from doing any work.
To
Okay,
keep
got
me
it.
from doing any work.
Got it.
Particularly out in the fields, picking cotton, pulling in corn, peanuts. Our farm was a working farm.
Okay.
And so everything you could imagine of farm work was available for us to do. My father was in the Navy, and as such, I had an opportunity to travel and sometimes to go to other places. Like I say, in my teen years, I was some of the students who were selected to integrate the schools.
Okay.
So I went
Do you
through-
remember that?
Yes.
Tell me about it.
Integration was a very painful process. A lot of the white families would stand in front of the schools and throw rocks at us and spit at us. The highway patrol on my first day of going to the integrated school had to open up a corridor for the black students to walk through. It was only 3 black students in this whole school. And I remember when I was in high school, there was only 11 black students of about 1,600 students in the school. And one day in the classroom, in history, when we hit on the Nat Turner story, the teacher asked me, what was I related to Nat Turner, because we had the same last name. So you can imagine what that was like to be able to respond to that. At first I thought about, well, I wouldn't say that I was, because it was easy to be just anonymous in the classroom. But I always felt it was right to stand up and to admit who my heritage was. And so I did. I told
What
him.
did you say?
I told him that, yes, he was in my lineage, that he was my great-great-great-grandfather. And I explained to the class the lineage that came to me was through my father, Herbert Turner, Jr., through his father, Herbert Turner, through his mother, Fanny Turner, who was the last person born in slavery in 1856, to Nat's youngest daughter, Charlotte, who was born on May the 30th, 1830, the year before he was executed. And that we were proud of our heritage. And the white students in the classroom did express some of those real classic, emotions that come along with misunderstanding. But I think they learned something too that day, that Nat Turner was a real person. And that he wasn't some myth. And that we would, people were there, and he was worth learning something about.
Well, that's one of the things that I was looking most forward to talking to you about, is that he's not a myth. It's not a myth. You have the real story about what
Yes.
really happened. And it's as it's portrayed in books and movies, it's very different. I learned that from you. So we would love to hear a little bit more about that. But before we do that, I'd like to know this. Today is the day. It happened today.
On his death.
On his death. It happened today.
Right, 11 on August the 30th, November the 11th, 1831, just a little after 11 o'clock, according to the jailers, he recorded it because he had to record it in order to present to the court that the prisoner had been executed. That was taken from the jail to the place of execution, which was a large sycamore tree in the town of Jerusalem. But today that town is now called Cortland.
Cortland, okay.
Right. That tree existed there until about the 1960s. And he was hanged. He was allowed to carry his Bible that he had when he was originally captured. And that Bible today is in the African American Museum in Washington, D.C. I was there when President Obama opened the magazine, opened the museum, and one of the first articles in which that everyone looked at was Nat Turner's Bible. I've looked into that Bible myself. It has some of his original handwritings inside of it. Wow. It's a little small Bible that fit inside of his pocket. And after he was executed, the city not the city, but the state of Virginia paid $375 to the relatives of Nat's masters because he had killed them. $375 because the state had executed a valuable piece of property.
Wow.
So even in death, he was still viewed as property. As I said before, slaves were not human in terms of the laws of Virginia at that time, and even basically in the laws of the United States. They were things. They were not even citizens. They had no recourse. Right. It was amazing that they actually gave Nat a trial before they hanged him. He was captured on the 31st of October, and then his trial was on November the 5th. He was charged with murder, sedition, treason, and insurrection. And 11 days later, he was executed.
What do you think he'd be saying if he were alive right now? Would the world be where he would think that it would be? Because I feel like some days I think we get very far and we've made lots of movement and things have happened. And then other days I'm like, we're still in,
Well, I think that if Nat was alive today, he would be very pleased with the progress. Pleased with the progress that his family has made. Okay. He went from having absolutely nothing, couldn't even have he didn't even have, say, possession of his own body. He actually got married, we believe, at around about 1818 or 1819. His wife's name was Cherry. They had at least 5 children. And out of those 5 children, Charlotte, the youngest one, was the only one that lived that had children that we know of. We know that one of his daughters, named Sally, was sold to North Carolina, but we don't know what had happened to her. Nat himself and Sherry were split up and sold separately in 1822, in June of that year. The bill of sales of those records are still on the court records. And Nat was sold for $450 to a man named Tom Moore, and Cherry was sold for $175 to a man named Giles Reese.
So sold for $450, but then upon death, they refunded $350.
$375.
Okay.
Because don't forget, there'd been a little depreciation from the time when he was sold in 1822.
Wow.
Where he was 22 years old. And in the slave system, a 31-year-old man was considered to be past his middle age. So he was not as valuable in terms of working in 1831 as he was in 1822.
And he was considered not as valuable because the average lifespan for a black person in
was about 40, 45 years old.
40, 45.
Yeah,
wow.
if that was lucky if they got that far.
Right.
A few lived beyond that, but mostly it was averaging out at about 40 to 45.
Okay. What can you tell us? Now are you listening?
I'm listening.
What can you tell us about Nat Turner as a man? Okay. So not what we've read about, not what's in the textbooks. What can you tell about him as a man, as a person?
Well, I will give you the beginnings of him.
Okay.
As a child, Nat was actually, his real name was Nathaniel. That's where he was born in 1800 to Benjamin Turner.
Okay. Who
was a prosperous third generation slave owner and farmer. Nat's mother was named Nancy. She was an African slave. In the bill of sale, when Benjamin Turner purchased her, described her as being an olive brown complexion African female of not of the usual Negro region, which means that most likely she was from the East African side of Africa. Nat lived under Benjamin Turner's ownership for 10 years, from 1800 until 1810, when Benjamin Turner died. It was here that during that time period, Nat taught himself how to read and write. He started learning about the Bible. He had at least one grandmother who was alive during that time. Her name was Bridget. Most likely he was Nat's father's mother, because Nat's father had escaped somewhere before Nat got out of childhood, but we never knew his name or what did he look like. But Nat referred to his father twice in his confession, so we can draw the conclusion that he did know about someone as a father figure. It was also Bridget who said coined a phrase that supposedly passed down with Nat through his lifetime.
Okay.
She said he had too much sense to be raised, and if he would never be of any use to anyone as a slave.
Too much sense to be raised. And if he was,
he would be of no use to anyone as a slave.
Wow.
When Benjamin Turner died in 1810, he wills Nat as well as Cherry and about 17 other slaves over to his son, Samuel Turner. And then he let Nat live with Samuel Turner from 1810 until 1822. It was during this time period where he began to get the feelings, or say the messages from God, to become a preacher. Mm-hmm. So Nat was a preacher. Mm-hmm. He also was a carpenter. He was a metal worker. He knew how to make tools. Okay. He wasn't just a field worker. He worked in the fields too, but he had many other skills. Mm-hmm. And most of the people in that area recognized him as being a man with education beyond not only the slaves, but mm-hmm. most of the white people. Mm. You have to take into account most white people at that time couldn't read or write either. So to have a slave in their presence who not only could read the Bible and preach the Bible, but also could do many other skills, was considered to be something of an asset. And so Samuel Turner allowed him to go about from plantation to plantation or from church to church to preach, which he did. He preached to the slaves in the area, and that's how he got to be known by many people, and he was accepted as a man of God as well as a man of his word. And then from Samuel Turner died in 1822, that's when he was sold mm-hmm. to Tom Moore. Mm-hmm. And so actually physically by the name and by the laws of Virginia, his name of Nat Turner changed to Nat Moore. Mm-hmm. But Tom Moore allowed him to keep his name of Turner.
And why do you think he did that?
I think Tom Moore probably felt that Nat was an asset to him. He could get extra money from him, from his preaching, as well as from some of the neighborhood. He could also hire Nat out. He hired him out to other farms to do metalworking, to do farming work, or to do specific buildings, things like that. So Tom Moore could realize economically mm-hmm. there was an advantage to let Nat keep his name.
Mm-hmm. Do you think he ever feared that with Nat having so much information and being able to read, that there would be what ultimately came?
I don't think so, because mm-hmm. Tom Moore only owned Nat from 1822 to 1828 when he died.
Okay, 6 years.
6 years. And then when he died, Tom Moore's youngest, only son, Putman Moore, who was about 6 years old, 5 or 6 years old, inherited Nat as property. And he became Nat's new owner. So at 5 years old, he owned a 28-year-old man, wow. as well as 17 other slaves. But during that time, Nat was now well established as a preacher. Mm-hmm. He had also begun to receive signals from God that says that slavery was wrong, and he was ordained to change it. He said that he had received signals that said that the first would be last and the last should go first, mm-hmm. and that he should take on the yoke that Christ had borne for the sins of men.
So that's really interesting, because most people, I think, when you think about Nat Turner and you think about him from the lens that you read,
right.
there is this dangerous person who did this very dangerous thing. But what you are saying is he was actually a man of faith.
He was a man of faith. He was a man of God. He believed in the Bible.
Okay.
One of his favorite passages in the Bible was from the book of Matthew. Seek ye the kingdom of heaven, and all things shall be added unto you. Mm-hmm. He always used that as a phrase of opening up his sermon, so he said. Benjamin Turner was his first master, had provided some land for a church to be built that was known as Turner's Church. And Nat was allowed to preach to slaves in the backyard of the church. He preached there from like 1820 all the way up until 1831. His last sermon was the week before the insurrection. He preached to a large crowd of slaves in the backyard at Turner's Church. Mm-hmm. And it was there he also gave out coded messages to the slaves that he was going to start the insurrection. On the inside of Turner's Church on that same day, a Reverend Richard Whitehead, a white minister, preached to the white congregation. And they would all meet up again later on in another week under different circumstances. But Nat as a man, insurrection only came to him because he felt that he was directed by God to take an action to end slavery.
Now, how do you think, because I know we talked about this, but what do you think it was that made him interpret that message when the Bible
said, thou shalt not kill?
Thou shalt not kill. And talked about slaves and yes. having ownership over people. Right. So how do you think he got there?
It was a slow process. One of the things that Nat did mention in his confessions from the Bible, that he who knows his master's will and does it not shall be marked with many stripes. That is from Luke, I think, chapter 12, verse 11. Nat believed in the Bible. He studied it all the time. He fasted on fasting days. He baptized people. He himself was baptized as a Christian in 1825. He and a white man named Ethered Brantley baptized each other in a crowd in front of white people and black people. And at that baptism, Nat claimed that he was a free man because he was now a disciple of God. I don't know how well that set with the white population.
In which God became his master at that point.
God became his master. But he still had to do the work of his earthly master. In 1827, he decided to run away from Tom Moore. But he stayed away for 30 days and he came back on his own because he said, that's when he said that God told him that he who knows his master's will and does it not. So he came back because he was ordered by God to go back into slavery. But he began to get signs and signals that told him that God wanted him to end slavery and would use him as the instrument to do that. So that's the only time when he started to go from being a very complacent man to becoming one who sought out militancy as a way to end slavery.
So let's talk about that militancy.
Okay.
The rebellion.
The rebellion.
Tell me.
Well, the rebellion actually only happened for 3 days. Nat had planned it for almost 3 years. He started in 1828, according to his confessions, deciding that slavery had to be ended, but he didn't know how to do it at first. So what he did was he started studying the area as he would go about from farms to farms to preach to the slaves. He started preaching to the slaves about the Old Testament philosophies of an eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, and the right for vengeance, particularly for a wrong like slavery. That was his way of preparing the slaves so that they themselves would know that victory could be won if they followed him.
And that this was the will of God.
And this was the will of God. It was not profit. It was not economics. He was not looking to take over anything. He was looking to end slavery so that all slaves would be free. He wasn't looking for his own freedom. And that was one of the things I think that separated Nat from a lot of people who did rebel or showed some type of signs of opposing to slavery. They only looked out for their own freedom. He was looking out for the freedom for everyone, man, woman, child, it didn't matter.
In which you could understand someone looking out for their own freedom. You know, nobody wants to be a slave.
Right.
So that makes sense, but knowing that he even had that compassion in his heart at that time, that I'm not just going to free me and figure it out for me, but I'm going to take everybody with me. This freedom is for everyone.
Right. And everyone would also have to bear the same sacrifice. Now, that was, to me, was a tremendous advantage, or say not advantage, but a skill for him to be able to convince people whose whole life had been told that they were not worth anything, that they are, they had been separated from their families. They were not allowed to own anything. And to get people to believe that they could become free men and free women by following the orders that he received from God. And then to back that up, in February of 1831, there was a total eclipse of the sun. And that was a tremendous sign. Everyone saw that, black, white. It was well recorded, so we know that it happened. And Nat said that that's what he used as the final signal to tell the slaves God was on their side. So he assembled his first army of 6 people to start with him, was 6 slaves named Henry, Jack, Will, Sam, Nelson, and Hawk.
Okay.
And together, under Nat's leadership, with only weapons like knives and axes and pitchforks, they started off on August the 21st at night, on foot, in the dark, in August, extremely hot in Virginia at that time, to try to free themselves and everybody else out of slavery. To me, that was one of the greatest undertakings I think anyone could have ever done, because it required a tremendous amount of faith. I've lived out in those woods, and it can be extremely black dark out there. Been a little bit of a mathematician myself and astronomer. I did some calculations back, and on that particular night on August 21 in 1831, the moon was in its 4th quarter, what they call the first quarter. So it was only just a sliver of the moon. So it was not very well lit. So they had to find their way through the woods.
Pitch black.
Pitch black, and they covered 20 miles doing it.
20 miles. So not just to walk 20 miles, but to walk 20 miles and then...
And then you attack homes.
Yes.
His plan was to kill the owners of slaves in their homes. And the first home that he attacked was his own home that he lived in, in which there were the 5 white people were in that home. Joseph Travis, Sally Moore, or Sally Travis, Putman Moore, a little boy named William who was an apprentice, and Joseph Jr. Sally and Joseph's baby was a year old. They killed all 5 of the white people there, and then Nat technically became a free man.
Because his masters were dead.
Because his masters were dead. And they went from farm to farm throughout the night, and the next day, and attacking the farms in the areas that had slaves. He didn't attack homes that did not own slaves. Quakers particularly, there were a lot of Quaker families living in the area, and he bypassed each one of their homes.
So it was not about just being this evil person doing this terrible deed of, murdering all the white people around. It really was him saying, no, I'm going to do something myself and with my people to free my people.
Right. And he only targeted those who were enslaving people.
Wow.
And but he had told his followers that neither age nor sex nor social status was to be spared. And Reverend Richard Whitehead and his family of 5 were all killed. I told you that the week before, he and Nat had both preached at Turner's church, he inside, Nat outside. The next week, he and quite a few of the members of the church came under, meeting each other, but different circumstances. The roles had changed. And total, 55 whites was killed in the first initial area of the attack. And then the next day, after they had covered almost 20 miles, they came into conflict with armed militias of whites who they fought a battle. They eventually won the battle, but he lost a lot of his men. They tried to move to another area because they wanted to attack the town of Jerusalem, where he could fortify the town, raise an army, and then they would force the government to set all slaves free. Unfortunately, the militias that were much better armed than they were eventually broke up his band, and then Nat was forced to go out and hide out for 74 days. One of the things that was probably very discerning to Nat, a lot of the blacks fought alongside the whites against him.
Let's talk about that.
Okay.
You are a person of color, and you are trying to do something for all black people, and a portion of the people who you're working for are working against you. Tell me about that.
I thought that, to me, when I first learned about that, I felt betrayed. I thought, I felt Nat would have been enormously betrayed because he was, like you say, he was putting his life on the line. And the people who had joined him, they were putting their life on the line. But at the same time, I could understand why people did it because this was all they knew.
That's right. That's right. And they too might have been following that Bible that said,
do not
honor
kill.
Your masters and do not kill.
Right. And I look at it and I think about living is an intoxicant. When the worst condition of living is better than the most opulent surroundings of being dead. Ask King Tut.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
He was buried with all his riches, but he was still dead. And I think if he had had an opportunity to live another 30 years to give up all those riches, he would have taken the death. He would have taken the 30 years. Anyone would. So I could not fault the slaves who fought against Nat because to them, that was their way to live.
It was survival.
It was survival. We look back at it, putting ourselves in that same situation, and put yourself in that same situation. You have children. If you know that if you go out and join these people,
the punishment is going to be something
horrific.
Terrible.
And you want to protect the life of your children, if not your life, but your life of your children.
Right.
So you had to make a choice right then and there. And I'd say, I always tell people when I would give sports to anybody, ask yourself, would you have been the one to have joined him, knowing that what you were facing? And I don't think many people had the nerve to do that. So I don't fault the slaves who fought against him. I just feel sorry for them.
How do you reconcile that murder, by any means, murder, is not good? To murder another person is not good. How do you reconcile that with the work that he was doing and the reason he was doing it for was ultimate good? Where do you see that?
Well, murder is that little fine line between killing. When you kill a chicken to eat it, Is that murdering the chicken, or are you killing it because you need sustenance? In war, soldiers are taught to kill. I was in the military, and that embeds into your mind, you have to kill the enemy before the enemy kills you. In Nat's case, when you're looking at it to where the slave owners were the enemy, and they killed slaves all the time. Like I say, a white master could kill a slave at any time if he wanted to.
For no reason at all.
For no reason at all. Or any white person could just take a person out, and then they did. They couldn't do it. They could do it. They did it all the time. So if you're going to overthrow a system of that, you have to overthrow it completely. You got to be thorough. And the people that were killed, whether they were man, woman, or a child, because children could own slaves, women could own slaves. They all benefited from it. So not just killing the adult white males, you're not murdering. When in a battle, you're eliminating the enemy, because it is either you kill them or they will kill you. So it's a matter of survival. So Nat didn't murder people as much as to say, I don't look at it, I don't call it was murder. It was a justifiable homicide.
Justifiable homicide. Okay. I think some people will, not agree with that.
There's that morality involved.
Yeah, but that's an interesting way to look at it, a justifiable homicide based on the reasons he was doing it.
Yes.
Now, tell me how you feel he felt on that first night. So I want to go back to before all of it ended and he's in the woods. On that first night.
On the first night when they started, they assembled at a place called Cabin Point.
Okay.
And at first, a lot of the slaves did not want to kill all the whites or kill the white masters. They said, maybe we would just kill the males, or maybe we'll just tie them up. But Nat was insistent upon that they had to be eliminated. And he was selected to be the person to make the first blow. So when they went to the home of his master, Nat went into his master's chamber while he was in bed, asleep. This was at night.
Okay.
He hit him over the head with an axe. It didn't quite kill him, and then one of Nat's lieutenants named Will finished him off, and then Nat's Joseph Travis's wife Sally sat up and says, "What's happening?" And Will chopped her head off with his axe. And I won't get into any.
But these were gruesome murders.
They were
killings.
They were killings.
Yes,
because they didn't have any guns. They only had knives, axes, and maybe a pitchfork or two, just regular common farm instruments that they could get their hands on. And then they used those. They go from home, and at Joseph Travis's house, they did get a gun or two and some powder. And they went to the next house they hit was Salathia Francis. They killed him, and he only had one slave, but they freed him. And at Joseph Travis, at the Travis farm, there were also a total of 17 slaves, of which 9 of them were male. 2 of them were young boys, so they didn't join. So he picked up, as he would go from farm to farm, he would pick up people. And they would kill everybody who was there if they were slave owners.
Wow.
And they killed them with whatever weapons they could get their hands on.
So that night, after the first killings had happened, he's back in the field because they have to hide.
No, they kept moving.
Oh, they kept moving. Okay, but they had to sleep.
No, they didn't.
Oh, they just kept going.
They kept going.
Okay.
They started off that midnight, like I said, that night on the 21st, and they stayed on the move all the way to the 24th.
Wow.
Which they didn't stop to sleep or eat. Well, some of them did stop to eat, but they went, and unfortunately, some of his recruits decided to hit the liquor steals or the liquor stashes of their masters, because they had helped the masters make the liquor. Almost every home had a liquor still back then. The whites enjoyed their spirits. It was well known for their brandy in that area, their peach brandy in particular. So the slaves got into some of that, and unfortunately, he lost some of his fighters because of that. But by the same token, some of his fighters got a lot of courage.
Right, because it can do either one to you, kill you or give you lots of courage. Okay,
Right.
So they are going for 4 days straight.
Yes.
4 days straight. So this is happening every few hours or however often it took for them to get to
the distances between some of the houses was only about a half a mile, but some of the houses that they went to covered as much as 3 miles before they would go. Okay. And they had to go about it very stealthily. And it was when the sun came up, they had already killed about 22 people, but they still had to move, and they would come in very fast. By that time, they had managed to get some horses, in mules, and so some of them were mounted, and they would prevent the whites from escaping, and then they would convince the slaves to join them. But also at the same time, too, they ran in some slaves who did fight against them. Some of them even put up roadblocks to try to stop them. But the unfortunate thing was that he couldn't get to the town of Jerusalem because of a river that stood between him and the town. And the whites were able to fortify the 2 bridges of which he could cross.
Okay.
And he couldn't get across, and then from that they were able to rally and get more troops in, and eventually with just the power of their weapons, he was defeated.
So tell me what you think he felt when he was finally captured.
I think that Nat Turner made himself be captured. He was able to hide for 74 days, almost right in front of the whites. He went right back to where his home was, even though the masters and all those had been killed, and he stayed within the area. His wife, Cherry, was living in a place that was only about a half mile. She was living with Gilles Reese. They didn't attack Gilles Reese's house, and when the whites began to retaliate for the insurrection, Gilles Reese protected Cherry and the children, that's how Charlotte survived, from the vengeance from being executed by white bombs. I think Nat wanted to, during that time of he was out running around for of being captured, avoiding being captured, he realized that he wanted to let the population know why he did the insurrection. And he did try to recruit more people. And when he was finally captured, he was actually betrayed by 2 white guys. 2 black guys, rather, I'm sorry, by two slaves that had gone out hunting, and they came across his hiding place, and they went back and told their masters where he was, and then the militias surrounded the area, and he kept trying to avoid them, and then he decided to give himself up to a man named Benjamin Phelps on October the 30th. That was, like I say, 74 days after the insurrection had started. And then they took him from there. It's amazing they didn't execute him right there in the woods, because from where he was captured, it was about 11 miles to where they took him to the town of Jerusalem, where the court was. And the governor of Virginia had demanded that there be trials for the slaves. So there was a total of 29 trials of all the slaves who had been captured. 17 was executed, including 1 woman who was executed. Her name was Venus. And Nat was the last of the ones to be executed. Out of the others, most of them were manumitted. They were sold south out of the state. And a couple of them were actually returned back to their masters because their masters came in and said they had been a good slave, and they would make sure that they would stay out of trouble if they gave them back to him. Because don't forget, the slaves were property. They had value.
Wow. So based on how slaves were treated back then, period, they probably didn't give him a horse to walk those 11 miles.
No. Yeah. They actually rode him on the back of a wagon, according to some of the history from that time period. And crowds of whites were gathered along the little narrow roads and lanes, and they were demanding that he be hanged right then and there. They threw rocks and bricks at him. And by the time they got him to the jail, he was not in the best of shape. But they did put him in the jail, and then Thomas Gray, a local lawyer, came in and asked Nat, would he like to confess, or would he like to tell why he did what he did? So in 3 days, in a 3-day period, Nat gave almost continuously a confession, to which Thomas Gray wrote down, as he said, word for word. That is what we really know about Nat Turner mostly, because in that he described his life, himself, why he did what he did. It also gave the whites a timeline how the people were killed. And they used that confession in his trial to where that it was read in the court. A couple of people testified against him, including 1 black person. And the court made up what they call magistrates, because you have to take of this, slaves were property. They were not citizens.
So they couldn't be tried as
in
a
regular
being.
Court, right. He was tried in what was called small claims court, court of ore. And as a piece of property, it was determined whether or not he should be terminated, which would be the loss of that property.
Wow. So in his last moments, do you think that he felt a sense of righteous indignation, or do you think that he felt fear for what was getting ready to happen? Do you think he felt satisfied with what he was able to accomplish in those 74 days?
I go back from his confession and what it said, and from the records to the jailer. The jailer, who I actually had an opportunity to meet, a descendant of the jailer. And they had some records in their family, and the jailer had wrote down that Nat's demeanor was that of a man who was ready to meet his Savior, and that he said to the crowd of people that he had no regrets for the insurrection, for he had done the work that God had directed him to do. Now, one of the things you can take into account for this, as they went from farm to farm, they only killed people. They did not burn down any buildings. They didn't burn any crops or kill animals. The people who were killed, men and women, were not violated upon. You know, the fear that they would turn into mass raping and all that. None of that happened. They only killed the people who were the owners to free their slaves. So he was not looking, and they didn't steal items from the homes. That they only just killed the people and then moved on and took their slaves with them. If someone say, well, okay, taking the slaves with them was a form of stealing, but they didn't have a wagon load of booty following them, so to speak. They were not like pirates. He was strictly given by God was to kill people, and he didn't try to get his own personal freedom, because, like I say, for 74 days they were looking for him and they couldn't find him. He was the most wanted man in maybe all America at that time.
Well, I would almost think that he knew that he would not get his own freedom, that he knew that at some point he would be captured, he would be hung. And so he absolutely was doing it for the freedom of the other people.
Yes. And that's what he said in his confession, that it was not for him. One of the things that the whites tried to do was to discredit his intelligence. The word had passed around many times before that Nat was very intelligent. He knew how to make paper. He could make gunpowder. He knew how to calculate the tides and the stars. He could move it. That's why they were able to move about. He knew how to read the stars so that they could tell where they were going. And there was a team of white men who came from the University of William and Mary at that time, which was in Williamsburg. It was about 40 miles away. They came to the jail and they supposedly examined Nat and questioned him. They wanted to prove that he was not intelligent, but they went away scratching their heads because he was able to answer all of their questions, supposedly.
Right.
So when he was executed, his head was taken off from his body and given over to those very same doctors who had come from William and Mary to take it back to study.
So speaking of questions, we want to give a chance for our audience to ask you some questions. And I know that you are overly prepared for that. But there are some folks, and I want to give the caveat that some people may not agree that it was done from the perspective of wanting to save other people, was done, by God giving him the order to do that. There may be some folks in this audience that doesn't, they don't, that doesn't work for them.
People still today say that he was wrong.
Okay.
There's some who said that he should have just restricted the killing to white males only.
Okay.
And children and women should not have been killed.
Okay.
So I could expect that, yeah.
Okay, so let's get ready. Do we have any questions in our audience? Anyone interested in knowing something about Mr. Turner here or his great-great-great-grandfather?
Anyone? Okay.
How important is it for your kids to carry the same legacy?
Okay. The question was, how is it important for my kids, my descendants, to carry the lesson? Okay, I have 3 children. 2 boys and a girl, and I have 6 grandchildren, 5 girls and a boy. I made sure that they know, and I tried to give them all the information. That was one of my reasons for why I did so much research. When I was about 40, in my early 40s, one of my great aunts, she was the last of my grandfather's sisters and brothers who was alive, said that she wanted to know exactly how the family was related to Nat Turner. It was always stories, but we didn't have any real documentation. And so she said, well, I know you're one of those boys that gone to college and all that. Can you use your back then they used to call it intelligence, not intelligence. And she would like to know. She was 89 at that time. And so I took it upon myself. I started looking through records. And at first I didn't know how to do it. And then I thought about, well, why not look at the U.S. Census reports? So I started looking at census data reports, and they go back to the 1870s. Every 10 years, there's a census taken. So in 1860, slaves were not on the census in Virginia, mostly as free people. They were on there strictly under the names of their masters. The masters would either say he's got so many females, so many males. But since I knew the names of some of the masters, I was able to put them in place in the 1860s. 1870 was the first census taken after slaves had been freed in 1865. And then in 1870, 1880, 1890, that's when I saw my grandmother. 1870, I see my great-grandma Fanny on there, who is Nat's granddaughter. along with Charlotte, who is Nat's daughter. And they were living in the place which was right next to the John Clark plantation, which was one of Benjamin Turner's sons. And in 1880, they're in the same location. And then by that time, Fanny had gotten old enough to where she was starting to have children, so some of the children are listed. And then the 1890 census was destroyed in a fire, but the 1900, 1910 census, so that's how I first started to put the line together. And then I started going to the county courthouse looking at the records. Found out that everything that had happened on the courts, all the court cases were recorded, and those books are still there. Then I decided, okay, well, I knew who Benjamin Turner and Samuel Turner. I looked to see that they have wills. And I found in the will books, there are wills. Started looking through the books of transfers of property. Anytime someone bought and sold a slave, they had to pay taxes on it. So if you follow the money, you could find out who was being sold on such a day and how much they were paid for. Or when someone died and their family wanted to appraise the estate, there would be an appraisal made and all of their property would be valued. So that was the sources that I was able to put together. And so I was able to put it together, and I presented it to my Aunt Corinne, and she was so pleased. She brought tears to her eyes because she always wanted to know if those stories that she was told and that she had told her children, she had 8 children, and all the years in which that we knew about it, the farm that she grew up on is the farm where Nat Turner was actually captured on. And so I felt that I had done a great service to someone, and I passed that around to other people in the family, and everybody wanted to know more. They kept saying, well, do one for me, do one for me. So my profession is computer science. I worked in the computer industry field for a long time, for 40 years. So I did some of this in relation to some of my work. I had done some programming for the Department of Education and also for the Department of Defense. So I had access to the congressional records, as well as I got access to the state records. And I started going through and researching all that and putting it together. So I passed out information. I got a large volume of information now, and then I started connecting up with other people. I found out that there were other scholars, a lot of scholars out there, who was actually writing about Nat Turner. William Drury had wrote a book about the insurrection in 1899. I had never known that until I started researching. Henry Tragle had a very good book on Nat Turner. Scott French at the University of Virginia, had a chance to meet with him. He was a historian. Kenneth Greenberg, and I got to start getting the idea, maybe I could put this information together and present it. And some of the schools in the area, when they found out about it, they asked me to start coming to make presentations, like I did yesterday at a high school or at some of the colleges and universities. And so it was like an accidental step into it, but I tried to make sure that the information was all correct.
And are your kids carrying that down now? We talked a bit about that yesterday.
To a certain degree. I mean, they're not taking it on as much as I would like for them.
Well, you're still active.
But I'm still active, yeah. I'm still here. They have never lived on the farm. We still own our farm that we've had since the 1880s. They go back that far. And the farm is only about 5 miles from where Nat Turner originally lived. So that's how I knew about it growing up in it. And so I'm faced with the dilemma that where I have this property that my grandkids are not interested in it, but I want them to continue to maintain it. The churches down there where the families all lived, and I take them out to the cemetery so they can see who their grandparents were, their great-grandparents and great-great-grandparents, and always impress it upon them that I'm the 3rd great-grandson of Nat Turner, but my grandchildren are the 5th great-persons of Nat Turner. Now, having only one grandchild that's a Turner, and that's happened to be a girl, from my side of the line of Turner, the line may end with the name Turner, but it'll still go on. There was lots of other Turners in the family. My great-grandmother Fanny had 10 children, and most of those children had 10 children, 6, 10, 12 children each.
Which was common.
Which was common at that time.
And was done to support the families in their field work, absolutely.
Right. Oh, yeah. And so there are a lot of other Turners out there and the people, so I pass the information readily around to them. It's not looking at it only to my children. I give it freely to anyone in the family who wants it.
Absolutely. Do we have any other questions? We have one in the back. And one on this side.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. I work in a public school, and I'm on a mission this year to help our young Black kids understand the power of history, of their history. And a lot of young people I grew up with a grandmother and a great-grandmother and a mother who told me Black history, right? And I was very interested in it. But I tend to find that in 2022, they don't realize that Emmett Till died just 67 years ago. And twofold question. What call to action do you have about the power of history for today's Black youth? And how did knowing your own family history, how did it shape your personal identity? Because some people don't have the luxury of knowing the stories that you know about your third great-grandfather, and I think it's amazing. I was the nerdy kid who wanted to know. My cousins, not so much. But I realized that there's power in that, and I see the need for that in today's Black kids so that they know how to carry the history into their future.
Okay. Well, the answer to the first part of your question, as I told you before, growing up on the farm was always trying to get out of work. And so for me, learning was the best way to keep from having to go and work in the hot sun. And I often look back at it and say, well, maybe I had that innate ability because Nat taught himself how to read. And I look at it and I think that his opportunities that he had when he was growing up, the fact that he was able to become a preacher, that he could do things that was not always just working in the fields day in and day out, that he could also expand his world to know beyond just the boundaries of his plantation. Because most slaves had to stay on their plantation or wherever the owners tell them. If they say, you have to live here in this barn. You can only come out in the morning and you work and then you go in there in the evening, you better not come out. That was their world. Mm-hmm. They didn't have any other activity. They didn't have any other way to learn anything other than that. So I look at it, I had the opportunity to expand my mind from an early age, and I've had an insatiable appetite to always want to know. I love to read still, even now, in my old age. And I don't ever consider that I would know enough to where I say, this is it. I'm always looking to get the next book. I'm always reading the newspapers every day. I learned some things just coming here to Spokane. I never knew about the Spokane Indian tribe. Mm-hmm. So I can take that back with me, that I came here and I've added something to my knowledge. Mm-hmm. And I intend to do some more research because in my family heritage also is Native American. In answer to the second part of your question, I feel that it's important for children to know about themselves first before they know about someone else. It's great to learn about the other part of the world, what the other world is like, but you need to know as much as you can about who you are. I've traveled around the world a lot, and the only continent I've never been on is Antarctica. So I feel that I have a unique perspective in taking what I have learned about myself and how when I meet other people, when we're talking and they talk about their family and about their history, I can talk about my family and about my history. I've had dinner with people who are living in the same household that their relatives lived in back in the 1400s, or attend the same church that goes all the way back to the 1200s. So I can carry on a conversation with them and feel comfortable because I do know something about where I come from.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Tony. I'm a local social worker in town. I'm enthused and happy that your family has remained in Virginia, throughout your life. My question is, what has the state of Virginia done to recognize your great-great-great-grandfather in their history and their monuments and their, dedications?
It's been slow. At first, it was never hardly ever mentioned at all in the history books. When I was taking history, Virginia history in my early years, it was just one little paragraph. And when I was in high school, I started in that Virginia history class to where the teacher asked me, was Nat Turner and I related? That was only a small paragraph in the books. Today, it's a very large part of the curricula. Virginia has this thing called standards of learning, which the students have to show equivalency in order to pass to certain grades. And the Nat Turner as well as a part of slavery, is one of the required readings and the required knowledge on those. A lot of the colleges now include Nat Turner celebrations in their, particularly their Black History Months. Like I said, I've been asked to speak at all different kinds of schools. One time I was even asked to go to a school to which, during integration, Virginia was one of the schools, one of the states that participated in what was called massive resistance. After the Brown versus Board of Education decision in 1954, a lot of Virginia counties closed their schools rather than integrate. And for the white kids to have school, they set up academies. The Black kids had to either go to another state or do without. Well, one day I was asked to participate in a Black history celebration at what's called Southampton County Academy, which was the white school that, one that they set up specifically for the white kids to avoid integrated. And when the principal asked me about it, and I said, well, do you know the history of this school? He says, yes, but parents are now more progressive. And they wanted to know. And I went and I gave the presentation. I gave a full speech. And the kids received it very well. They asked very important questions. I participated in the school yesterday at John B. Rogers School out here. And the students were very engaging. And children want to learn. And as I said, that when I was in that class back in 1963, the white kids, I believe, were willing to learn. They were kind of surprised that Nat Turner was a real person. When you read something about someone like that, you say, no, that could not have possibly happened. But it was. It did happen. And so Virginia today, there's a lot of information about Nat Turner. There's a lot of discussions going on. There's still a lot of also too backlash. There are people who like to say slavery didn't exist or that it wasn't all that bad. And there are those who felt that Nat Turner was a bloodthirsty, venomous murderer.
Although they probably used the N-word.
Well, they don't use
they
that
describe
much.
No, then.
Yeah.
To describe him.
Right.
So before we go, there's something very special that we have to hear. And we'll get you. You wrote a poem.
Yes.
You're a bit of a poet.
I try. I dabble.
And you wrote a poem about Nat Turner.
Mm-hmm.
Can you read a portion of that for us?
Yes, I would. The poem, I wrote it specifically that if Nat had had an opportunity to speak to people before he was executed, what would he have said? Mm-hmm. And so I tried to channel Nat, and when I settled down, it was called A Chapter in the Oasis. And the poem goes, perhaps I may not have much to offer. I have fewer flowery words to utter. My heart aches to be in such a muddle, guns are pointed at me in bundle. But I'll bear the pain for you, because I have honesty to give. What'll be happier in this life than to be true to each other. Perhaps I have no aggression to sound. 'Tis hard to escape from this labyrinth. My body is battered in the thorn untold. The spears are piercing hard at the foe. But I'll wear the scars for you, because I have conformity beyond. What'll be happier in this life than for all to be my brother. Perhaps I may be a guest in this oasis. I have not a shelter to hide. My thoughts of hate are lost in the maze. All eyes stare hard as I pause to give grace. But I'll carry the anguish for you, because I have sincerity unending. What'll be happier in this life than for us to love one another. Perhaps I may not sound your praise. I have no voice left to raise. My mind is shattered by the way the mob has lain its arms for the day. But I'll preach ever high your esteem, because my mortal self has gone to rest. What'll be happier in this life than for each to live at your very best. So that's what I feel that Nat Turner would have wanted the world to know about him. And he given an opportunity to speak it. And I'm so pleased that I was able to share that poem with you. And I hope in some way it inspires you to want to know more about him.
Well, I'm excited that you were able to join us today, join us in this beautiful institution, Gonzaga University, and to be a part of the Northwest African American Museum Descendant Series. So thank you so much, Mr. Turner, for being here. Now we want to give another question. We have one more question. We want to get that one in.
Okay.
Yes. So thank you all so much for being here. You all already know me, but I'm Dr. Callie Slayer. I'm the Director of Education and Engagement with the Northwest African American Museum. And we also want to just say thank you to our viewers online. We have quite a few viewer questions coming in online, so I wanted to ask a few of those questions for our viewers online. So the first one is from Myrisha S., and her question is, Nat Turner was a piece of property according to the legal system of the period. Do you have any theories as to why the legal system would provide a trial for someone who was legally property?
Mm-hmm. Yes, as I said, it was pretty foregone conclusion, and that was to be executed. But the governor of Virginia at that time, William Floyd, was named the governor, wanted to have to show to the world that slavery was legal, and that the legal system of the United States of America at that time and the laws of Virginia supported that, the weight of law. So by having a trial, even though it was a show trial, that they proved to the world that slavery was not an aberration, that it was legal, and that that the whites had the legal right to their property, and they had the legal right to do with their property as whatever they chose to do.
Thank you. Do we have any more online questions?
Yes, we do. Thank you all so much, and thank you, Mr. Turner. We've actually been able to extend it with so many questions, and we really appreciate your time and you being here. This question is from Patricia, and we have a question also from Charlotte. How did the family reconcile the mutilation of his body after the hanging? Well,
at 1831, the family had absolutely nothing to do about it. I mean, Nat Turner was hanged. There was supposedly some slaves that was there at the hanging. According to the records at that time, a thunderstorm came up right after he was hanged. His body was given over to the medical examiner, who removed the head and kept the remains of his body. And then it was put into what was known as a pauper's grave. Through the years, a lot of people said that Nat was boiled down and that the candles were made from the fat. And some people said that there was money pouches made from his skin, that his bones were broken up and made into powder to be used as juju juice or whatever. But as far as from what is known from the history of it, that is accurate history, none of that actually happened. A few people in the county used to claim that they had pouches that was made from his skin, but when an analysis was actually done on those, it turned out to be deer skin. There's a skull that has now been examined by the Smithsonian Institute that was reputed to be the skull of Nat Turner, that after the doctors at William and Mary got through examining it, it was given over to someone who took it to Chicago, and it survived the Chicago fire. And then but we're still determining if that was the skull of Nat Turner.
And with DNA, we can tell now.
Well, some of the DNA can.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Our next question.
You said it was one from Patricia?
Yes. And so, yeah, we had a lot of comments and people just, thanking you for sharing your story and telling us about your heroic ancestor. I was just going to share a few of those comments with you from our viewers, and then give it back to Kiantha. So Patricia said, "Thank you so much. I am older than Bruce Turner, and I didn't learn any of this in elementary and high schools in the HBCU I attended." And she's from New Orleans. And another one from Charlene just saying, "Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge. This has been such a wonderful evening," and that she appreciates your time, Mr. Turner. Thank you.
I appreciate them listening.
I would go so far as to say that people in the room also appreciate your time and appreciate you being here and sharing as much information as you have.
There's a gentleman back that keep raising his
hand. Yes, sir. Yes.
When I was in high school, I'm guessing you would have been in college, but the book came out that became quite controversial. William Styron's book, was he way off in his version?
Yes, he was. William Styron wrote a book that he called The Confessions of Nat Turner, which is the same title that Thomas Gray's confession was. In William Styron's book, he depicted Nat as a 21-year-old, in my opinion, sex fiend. That his only reason for why he had the insurrection was he had the hots for this white girl named Margaret Whitehead, whom Nat did kill. That was one of the few people that's one of the people he was actually charged with murdering. And that was the basis of Styron's book. I always tell people it's good literature, but it's trash as far as when it comes to accuracy.
We've read that in high school.
Yeah, and if you go online right now and you pull up the Confessions of Nat Turner, you're going to pull up William Styron's book. I had an opportunity to meet William Styron, and he and I debated that quite a bit, but he wrote the book as a form of fiction. But I told him, how would people who are the descendants of Abraham Lincoln feel about if he wrote that Abraham Lincoln was a pirate who went around raping women up and down the southern seaboard rather than the president of the United States?
Mm-hmm. And what was his answer?
Well, he said probably they wouldn't like it, but if it's fiction, as an artist, he has a right to write it.
Mm-hmm. Very good. We have one more question as well.
Okay.
Mr. Turner, thank you so much for being here and sharing this powerful history with us. I wonder about how you define the death of Nat Turner. Did he give up his life for freedom? Did he lose his life for freedom? Was he lynched? What terminology do you use in describing how his life ended?
I'd like to say that Nat Turner was a casualty in the fight for freedom. He was neither, like I say, he didn't give up his life. He hoping, I'm sure he had every anticipation that he would live, and that in order to get the people to follow him was that they could be free. In terms of the state, the city, he's been executed. You could say that, well, he was not murdered or not lynched because they did go through the process of having a trial. And that when you have a trial and a person is executed, that is the penalty. You're not killing the person per se, or murdering the person, you're giving them punishment. But in terms of, say, the war for freedom, there are survivors and there are casualties. If you look at to say that the Nat Turner insurrection could have been the first shots fired to the American Civil War, then that would have made him a casualty of the Civil War, even though it happened 35 years later. So I hope that answers to your question, that he just didn't give up his life. No, he was a casualty of war.
I've learned so much from you. I've learned so much from you. And what I hope that people realize in speaking with you and listening to your words is that no matter what they think about Nat Turner, no matter if they think what he did was good or bad, none of that matters. What matters is that he was a man. Mm-hmm. He had faith. He did what he felt was right. Mm-hmm. And he also did it so that you and I
would be able to benefit.
Would benefit from that, and that we could be here together to even just talk about it. So thank you so much. Thank you so much for being here. Now we'd like to turn it back over to the president of the Northwest African American Museum, Lanisha DeBartoleben.
Okay. And I thank all of you all.
This is a conversation that we do not want to end. We are learning so much. This has been such an insightful conversation. We thank you, Mr. Turner, for expanding our awareness of our American history. We thank you for the depth of research that you have done with love for your ancestry. And we thank you for sharing it with all of us and inspiring us with this history and with this example that you have set. We all have a family history. We all have ancestors. And so we all have some discoveries to make about ourselves as well. So we thank you so much. This has been a deep historical lesson tonight that you have shared with us. And this glimpse into Nat Turner's life that we've not read in the history books, that we've not seen on the big screen. Wow. But you have come here to the state of Washington to teach us, to inspire us, and to bring us together so that we can become better as we know more about our American history. Thank you, Mr. Turner. And Ms. Duncan, thank you for being the extraordinary moderator and civic leader that you are. You bring conversations to life, and you bring us all into those living conversations. We are so grateful to be here in Spokane, Washington, as we remember the life of our dearly beloved, departed friend, civil rights leader, community activist, institution builder, Sandy Williams, who was executive director of the Karl Maxey Center here when she suddenly lost her life 3 months ago. We intentionally chose to bring this conversation to Spokane, Washington, in tribute and in honor of Sandy Williams. So let us take a moment of silence to pay tribute and respect to one who gave so much to this community, to this people that she loved. A moment of silence. Thank you. May she rest in power and in peace. The upcoming editions of NAAM's Descendant Series will feature the descendant of Sojourner Truth and other legendary leaders, so be sure to tune into NAAM, to visit our website, to follow us on social media, and subscribe to our newsletter so that you can be aware of the next Descendant Series conversation and everything that this museum is doing in service to community. We thank the Spokane Branch NAACP for their partnership tonight. Thank you, Gonzaga University and Spokane Public Schools, where Mr. Turner visited yesterday, engaging with an auditorium full of high school students learning stories they did not learn in their history books. Thank you, Mr. Turner, for visiting with our young people. To all here today and to all tuned in, we thank you. We hope you consider joining the Northwest African American Museum as a member by going to our website at naamnw.org. We advance justice and equity, cultivate educational empowerment, and center and celebrate Black history, art, and culture 365 days a year. We're so grateful to our staff and to our partners for the hard work they put into this program. We close by encouraging you to continue to use this powerful history of Nat Turner's life to stay on this path of full freedom for all. And now, a closing musical rendition from NAAM's African American Cultural Ensemble.